I love it.
Now, Chris, did you want to mention Jack Kern?
Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our VBC Happy Hour. I am Todd DiPastino. I am the host of VBC Happy Hour. At least I am tonight. Some night Sean is the host, and I'm the wing person or wingman. And sometimes I'm the host. And tonight I'm the host. Sean will be my backup. How are you doing, Sean?
I'm wonderful. How's it going?
I'm doing well. It is September 26th, and we're back here every Monday night as we are with VBC Happy Hour. Tonight, we are focusing on Army Civil Affairs, and we're also focusing on muting people as they come in. And we have Colonel Chris Holshek here. He is, you can see he's right on the Hudson River. We have General Chris Stokel. How are you, Chris? And you are in New Jersey, I believe?
That is absolutely correct. Thanks for inviting me.
Very good. And then we have Hughes Turner, Colonel Hughes Turner, who is in Michigan. Thank you for joining us, Colonel. And what they all have in common is they were all in Army Civil Affairs. They're going to tell us about what Civil Affairs is. There's an adage, there's a popular adage that goes something like this. I remember hearing it probably 25 years ago, that the whole purpose of an army is to break things and kill people. And I think if we went through with Chris, and Hughes, we'll ask them to comment on that adage. Is that all that an army does? I think that they would say, no, it isn't. That an army really has a larger strategic value and purpose. And that and I'm going to steal an insight that General Stokel just made before we went live. And that is, if an army starts killing people and breaking things, we've failed. That's a sign of failure. That's a sign of that, strategic goals weren't met through other means. So we're going to get into that conversation, specifically focusing on the war in Afghanistan, what went wrong there, the great power competition that we see across the globe today, and the role of civil affairs, I think, in maintaining our national security. Before we get into that, I do have a few announcements I want to make, and I'm looking around the room here, and I do see some of our I see Carlo Medina, and I don't recognize Carlo. Are you joining us for the first time, Carlo? If you don't mind me saying hi.
Hey, Todd, I don't mind at all. It's been quite some time since I've joined these meetings. Probably, I might have joined one during COVID, but I was in person one time just before COVID kicked off. So.
Oh, okay. Great. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. Is there a reason you're joining us tonight? In other words, do you have civil affairs experience?
No, not at all. I saw it in the email, and I saw the topic about Afghanistan, so I just wanted to pop in and check it out.
Can I ask if you're an Afghanistan veteran?
I am not. Ramadi, Iraq veteran, 2005 to 2006.
Got it. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for allowing me to say hello and unmuting yourself. That's hard for a lot of people to do, I understand. But let me also let people know, if you live in the Pittsburgh area, we're having a breakfast tomorrow. You know, the Veterans Breakfast Club started in 2008, holding events just like you see this one in the picture here, where we get veterans together with the public and have veterans share their stories. I'll be hosting that. Actually, Sean and I will be co-hosting that tomorrow, and we'll be working the room with the microphone, and we'll be asking for veterans to kind of stand up and share a story. That is going to be tomorrow in the Bethel Park area, the South Hills area of Pittsburgh at 8:30 a.m. Please do join us if you can. Would love to have you. We'll get about 100 people, I think, in that room tomorrow. And one of them will be Bob Stevens. And that's correct. That is not a misspelling. His name is B-O-B-B, Bob Stevens, who is a World War II vet. By my count, I'm looking at the roster. I see 3 World War II vets that are going to be joining us tomorrow. A Navy Wave, Bob Stevens, a Navy officer, and Marine, Jack Morrow, should be joining us tomorrow, too. So served in the Pacific. So Bob Stevens will be joining us. We'll be definitely having him talk about his service aboard these 2 ships. And Bill Moran, I see that, Sean, that Bill Moran will be joining us tomorrow. And as you know, Bill just was in recent communication with his helmet from Vietnam, and his helmet wrote him a letter. describing his perspective on the Vietnam War. And we published it on our blog. So we're going to get Bill to talk about, and we're going to have one of our wide-ranging conversations that we often do about pieces of military equipment. The M1 helmet will be something that we'll be talking about and comparing it to the current, what do you call the current helmet? The Kevlar helmet. Is there a name for it? Is there a young vet out there? Do you just call it a helmet?
Just Kevlar. It's just Kevlar.
Just Kevlar helmet. This is Bill Moran's boonie cap hat from Vietnam. He's going to bring it. And so we'll be talking about the boonie cap also. Thursday night, we have a special program. This is Greatest Generation Live. Glenn Flickinger will host this conversation about Pan Am Airways in World War II. This is a offshoot. What is it called? It is a spinoff of the program that we did with the Pan Am stewardesses a few weeks ago, those who flew in and out of Vietnam during the Vietnam War. We've learned that Pan Am was also very much involved in the airlift and the war during World War II. And so we're going to have that conversation with experts and historians and Pan Am personnel on Thursday night. And then a week from tonight on our VBC Happy Hour, we're having author Jack McLean, who's wrote this wonderful, beautiful, terrific memoir called Loon, a Marine Story. People like Jack McLean did not join the Marines. Jack McLean went to Andover prep school. He was destined for Harvard, but he, for some reason, in 1967, and I think he was the only one in his graduating class from Andover who decided to not only join the armed forces, but join the Marine Corps. And he wrote this beautiful memoir about his time in the Marine Corps and his time in Vietnam, and I highly recommend it. I'm very much looking forward to having Jack share his story with us a week from tonight. Finally, Sean is going to be hosting this event. I'm going to be the wingman for this one in 2 weeks. And I'm going a little farther out than we usually make announcements, because this is about the SS Mayaguez incident. And many of you who served in Vietnam will remember this, but it's not something that most Americans know about. It's the last battle of the Vietnam War. And it happened in 1975 when members of the Cambodian Khmer Rouge captured this container ship, the SS Mayaguez, with a captain and 39 crew members, and held them as hostages. And there was a rescue attempt and a rescue made. All the hostages were released. And we're going to have some Marines who served on that rescue. 41 or 42 Americans died in this operation. And they're the last names on the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. So we're going to have some veterans of this incident join us in 2 weeks. Our magazine, before we kind of start our program, I want to remind people that we publish a quarterly magazine where we take the stories that we hear on our events and at our events, and we put it in text form. We send this out free of charge to anybody who wants it. And this is our next issue with the wonderful Sandy Ortega on the cover. She was the first Black female Air Force officer, and her story will be, she's our cover story for the fall 2022 issue. We send out about 7,700 of these to different addresses around the country. And then we print up another 7,500 or so to hand distribute. So if you do not get one of these in the mail, it's because we don't have your address. Please let us know your address. It's free of charge. We'd be happy to send you them. Somebody just emailed me today asking if I could send a box. And I think that we do that all the time. I'll send a box of 50 or 75 that people can distribute. And I want to let people know that one of the special things that we have in this issue is this remarkable story from a man named Paul Kircham, who our own Henry Shepke wrote to. Henry Shepke, as you'll know, is a high school student from Madison, Wisconsin, who joins us on our programs. He may be with us tonight. He loves to hear these veteran stories, and he's taken it upon himself to write thank you notes to all the World War II veterans he could reach. So far, he's reached over 300 of them, and he wrote one to Paul Kircham. Paul Kircham wrote back. Paul Kircham is 102 years old, and Paul Kircham is a Bataan Death March survivor. Paul Kircham did a 17-page handwritten letter telling Henry his story. Henry then got in touch with Paul and asked if we could publish the letter in our magazine, and he said yes. So this is the letter that Paul wrote, and it's going to be in our magazine that should be hitting mailboxes very soon. I want to finally, before we start our program here with our guests, thank D&D Auto Salvage for their long-standing sponsorship of all our programming. They sponsor our in-person program, and they put an ad in our magazine, and they sponsor our VBC happy hour. They are an auto salvage and metal recycling facility. They have 2 locations in Western Pennsylvania, and you can get quotes and learn more about what they do at dndautosalvage.com. That's dndautosalvage.com. And then we also have re-upped a wonderful relationship with tobacco-free Adagio Health. You veterans smoke too much. Americans use too much tobacco. And Adagio Health wants to help people quit smoking and also wants to encourage policies to make a healthier places to live, work, and play. You could learn more about Adagio Health and their tobacco-free program at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. That's tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. Now, there's one other thing I want to bring up, but only if Cliff Pfeiffer is with us. Cliff Pfeiffer from Colorado, are you with us? If he's not here, I'm going to save it for when he is here, because he should get credit for this conversation. Okay, I do not see him. So next time Cliff joins us, and if Cliff does join us tonight, we'll break in and have him. Chris wrote me a complaint, a complaining email today. And I think he's exactly right. He complained about something that we said in our weekly VBC bulletin, and I wanted to have him share that and agree with him. But let's turn to our guests. Thank you for your patience, Colonel, and General. We're very grateful that you're joining us tonight, Chris Holshek, Chris Stokel, and Hughes Turner. These are 3 retired Army officers who have extensive experience in civil affairs. Can I ask, first of all, can you define what civil affairs does in layperson's terms in a way that we would understand, Chris Holshek?
Sure, Todd, and thank you very much for having us. And it's a real great opportunity for us to explain a very little known capacity or capability that the Army has had for a much longer period of time than most people realize. And that there's sort of kind of 3 myths that I want to kind of break here. Is one is that war is about, as you say, killing people and breaking things. War is a lot more than that. The other thing is that the common perception of civil affairs is we hand out soccer balls and candy and win hearts and minds.
Yeah.
We do PR.
Yeah.
On the ground. And that's not what we do. That's part and parcel of it sometimes, but that's not what we do. We're not public affairs people. And the third thing, as I mentioned, is that civil affairs has been around a lot longer than you think. So let me kind of work those backwards. Civil affairs basically has its origins in what can be called military government, which goes back to the conquest of the West in the 19th century. We had our own version of what you call ungoverned spaces, for which the Army was largely responsible. In fact, if anybody remembers how California came into the Union in 1851, California actually had a military governor before they had a civilian governor. So the Army was given this task. The Army was given the task after the Civil War, in the so-called Reconstruction period in the South. And they used largely the military police officers to kind of, be temporary mayors of many southern towns. And then the first time we heard the term military government was during the Spanish-American War, following in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic, and so on, and in the Philippines. And so you had the development of civil affairs, military government, and these were temporary units that provided this sort of transition. So in a sense, the root of civil affairs is about transitioning from military to civilian lead or control of the population, and to from the military solution to the political solution. And war is always about politics, right? I mean, Clausewitz tells us that. Wars about politics, wars about psychology, and wars about people. And particularly nowadays, this is very true. I would submit to you right now, the war you're watching in Ukraine is a people-centric war that's disguised as a conventional war. Because we're watching force on force, but the struggle is actually over the population and by the population. And the reason I would contend that the Ukrainians are doing so well is they have learned one of the major lessons of the wars of the early part of the 20th century, which are people-centric wars, whether you're talking about Afghanistan, Iraq, or anywhere else. And that is that the folks who win are the people who not only have the better learning organization, as I learned, back in the early part of the war in Iraq, but also the people who have the superior network, the superior learning network. He who learns fastest with the mostest in these kinds of people-centric wars are the people who stay on top. So you have to have networks, you have to know how to build them, and these are human networks. They're not just, I'm not talking about cyber networks, but that's very important to this. It's a technological enhancer. So we have military government, and then we decided there was a report done at the end of World War I when we were in the Rhineland, that basically the Hunt report, many of its recommendations still have yet to be enacted, like a permanent member of the staff at the Army headquarters in the Pentagon, who is in fact a civil affairs officer and talks all things civil military operations. Still has yet to be done. But he basically made a lot of recommendations and said, hey, look, this population engagement stuff that we have to do, this military government stuff, where we're filling in the spaces between the civilian government and the military occupation forces, we're going to be doing this over and over again. And it was a very prescient report because, of course, 20 odd years later, we did this in World War II. So our kind of classic moment, when I like to tell people we did the reconstruction and transition of Germany. We did the reconstruction and transition of Japan. We did the reconstruction and transition of Korea. Those of you who don't like nation building, I tell them, okay, so how do you like your car? How do you like your Volkswagen? How do you like your Toyota? How do you like your Hyundai? Because those are all three countries, modern nations that were started in military government.
Let me break in here for a minute, Chris, and ask you, first of all, you use the term nation building. That is a phrase that from what I remember, probably got some bad connotations after the Vietnam War. And I do remember I think it was President George W. Bush, before the attacks of 9/11, saying that this country will not commit itself to nation building. That's not what our military is built to do. Do you think that that phrase nation building needs to be rehabilitated, needs to be brought back out, and there is a way to do it that can be done, that it can be successful?
Well, it has to be done in a very focused way, and the problem is when you don't have your political military objectives very clearly outlined and achievable, okay, as you did in Iraq and Afghanistan, then nation building is not going to work. But when it's focused and has very clear end states, like it did in Germany, like it did in Japan, like it did in Korea, then you're successful. And by the way, one last thing I want to just make the claim to fame for anybody who wants to understand some things about what civil affairs is. There were 2 weeks ago on September 7th, there was a PBS NewsHour story done on the sort of cultural heritage protection
Mhm.
people. Arts, monuments, and archives is what it was called. One of 20 functional specialties in civil affairs that came out of World War II, the so-called monuments men and women.
Monuments men, right.
And that is, you know, that is preserving the moral component of war. I mean, Churchill is reputed to have said, you know, when these 40 or 50 odd people had saved about 4 million pieces of artwork from being destroyed by the Nazis and returning them to their rightful owner. This is, by the way, the first time in the history of warfare on such a scale that a conquering army actually secured and preserved and returned artifacts that belonged to countries and to people in those countries rather than looted them, which is what the Russians did on the other side, you know, of Germany and the other side of Europe. This said an awful lot about the American character. And it said, and this is one of the things that generated such goodwill that we've had with the Europeans for so many years following World War II and since then. This builds alliances and relationships. And that's a big part of what civil affairs does. We build those relationships that we must leverage not only to win on the ground tactically, but to win strategically. And those relationships are exactly why the Ukrainians are winning, because they were able to plug into an alliance that's helping them out.
I think of the Berlin airlift of 1948, 1949. Not only did it keep a city of several million people alive with all the food, fuel, and medicine that they would need for almost a year, but it built relationships. I'm just realizing it now. It built relationships between the authorities in West Berlin and the citizens of West Berlin and the American military presence there.
Yep.
That is really fascinating. Can I ask you, and also General Stokel and Colonel Turner, to address, and this is a big man, you guys I got to hand it to you for addressing this issue. How did civil affairs work and not work in Iraq and Afghanistan? I know those are two different scenarios, two different cases. Can we start talking about that?
Sure. Hey, and Hughes, I'll turn it over to you in a couple of minutes if that's all right with you. But Todd, I wanted to kind of jump on a couple of themes. I actually already have 6 notes that I could talk about the next hour. So maybe we'll get to 1 or 2 of them. But you talked about relationships. And, you know, the way I explained to my higher headquarters, they're asking, why is your unit doing this? And why are you so aggressive? You're just, actively seeking missions. No, people are seeking out my unit and they're actually willing to pay. Because a big thing, especially for the Army Reserve, is who's going to pay? Who's going to pay those reserve pay and allowances, RPA? Because normally travel, lodging, your daily per diem, that's covered under some kind of exercise. There's money budgeted for that, but it's the reserve pay and allowances that are a big deal. Well, at U.S. Army Pacific and the Indo-PACOM Command, they were actually willing to pay for some civil affairs activities. And it was pretty important. But you mentioned the word relationships. And what I would always tell my headquarters is, hey, I'm doing the 3 R's. I'm building relationships. I'm doing a reconnaissance, nothing bad. But, those 3 cups of tea, I don't want to be doing that first cup of tea, in a bunker, or in a subway station in Kyiv. I kind of want to already know what that subway line looks like. And so that's the reconnaissance, the relationships, and the rehearsals, the ability to get part or all of my teams, and there's different teams within a civil affairs command, a KCOM. So they're moving. And I treated every exercise that involved like 4 or more people as a mini deployment. So we're going through those pre-mobilization, those pre-mob checklists, make sure people's insurances are right, make sure their healthcare is right, know, when they're going to get paid. So we're not I was Army Reserve with 19 years of federal service, but I wasn't that National Guard unit that got it. And believe me, there are plenty of other reserve units that got jammed up at a national training center, a combat training center, and they didn't get paid. And so it's kind of rough. If you're out of your civilian job for 3-4 weeks supporting this major exercise, you kind of need a mid-month paycheck. And when it didn't happen, then it takes a week for spouses or somebody at home to get you to know. And so the composition, the Compo 1 active duty, Compo 2 National Guard, and Compo 3 Reserve, I don't want to quite say they're seamlessly integrated, but they're never have they been better integrated, but never do we need more integration. And so I'll jump over to your Afghan question. I do appreciate it if we get to the civil affairs and SOCOM question. I can give some background on that. I saw that pop up in the chat. But look, here, I mean, to me, 20 years in Afghanistan, and I'm a two-time tour Iraq guy, and then I spent another year supporting Central Command, or CENTCOM, specifically 3rd Army Central, or they call that RCENT, in Kuwait for a whole year. And so I got to actually physically see the last vehicle drive, south from Iraq to Kuwait. And it was an interesting feeling. But we still had some residual forces at the embassy, unlike Afghanistan, where it was a total collapse. And we can talk about the airfield versus Kabul International. There's a lot of things going on there. Multiple political parties had a plan to get rid of that. Bottom line up front, I would just say the execution could have been a little bit smoother, but there were numerous rehearsals talking about this. And, there's a saying that goes, no great plan survives contact with the enemy, right? So that's all part of what happened. And it could, the way it happened, I think we're fairly lucky that worse didn't happen, but we're also pretty lucky that the planners did think of a lot of stuff that we don't hear about because it went semi according to plan. So yeah, could outer security been better? But I lived in a world in special forces, and to some extent civil affairs, it's kind of just gray out there. Like, back when I was a major in Iraq, people like, oh, you can't get anyone hurt. You got to protect them. We got to bring everyone home. Because I've been to a lot of Army schools. I got badges and tabs for some excellent training I received. And I'm like, sir, ma'am, I'm not going to go out there and find every firefight I can, but we need to defend ourselves. But I'm going to do good leaders reconnaissance. I'm going to read intelligence report. I'm not going to take a 2-vehicle convoy with a gunner, a driver, and a TC into some beehive in Nasiriyah in southern Iraq. And so I think the bottom line is, when policy meets the road, there's a lot of challenges. And so it's really easy when you're on the ground. And I think, Chris was a great leader in Iraq. He gave me a lot of flexibility. And I started off with some great security. I had a Marine platoon, and then they went away. And then we got some MPs at like night, but I was confident that because I was a 2-2 Arabic speaker, but Egyptian Arabic. So there's the slangs get a little bit different in Iraq, but I mean, Chris was very gracious in the way he let me do shaping operations. I mean, I'm on TV in Nasiriyah getting beat by an Iraqi war veteran when they fought against Iran, and he's got one leg and one arm, and he's kicking my butt in ping pong, and it's great. Like, for a week, people are like, they want to come just visit the CMOC, the Civil Military Operations Center that I ran for, Colonel Holshek, and it was just phenomenal. So I was sure that my Iraqi security team would at least empty the magazine in their weapon before they ran away. So that would allow me to blow the back cement and just drive away. Hopefully I wasn't in that big of an ambush. So again, that's about the relationships, the reconnaissance, the rehearsals. And so, so my biggest thing, to answer your question, and I'll turn it over to Hughes, who maybe can talk a little bit about his experiences, and certainly at 3rd Army, RCENT, Army Central. Was, Washington's a long way away. And with the way that we have these common operating pictures, the COBs, it is so easy for senior leaders at either the 2, 3, or 4-star headquarters or in Washington say, we need to do this and we need to do that. Well, but I'm seeing this, and I remember working with Special Operations Forces, SOF forces, pre-2011, and we got this chat going on, and so people are talking into mics, and you have transcribers like taking what people are saying in a mic and posting it in a secure chat room. And I just thought that blew my mind. Never mind that's 20 years ago. Never mind what's happening now, and it's all being beamed live. So policy doesn't often, good planned policy often has many speed bumps / steel reinforced, walls that maybe we need to show a little flexibility to. But again, warfare's, politics by extension. Clausewitz there. So, those civilian leaders are going to make decisions. We're going to execute them to the best of our ability. But clearly we failed the nation a little bit on the execution there. General Donahue, a couple of the senior, leaders that were like the last one on the airplanes, they have a different story. But I think the biggest thing in Afghanistan was that we just didn't leave that residual force like we did in Iraq, which supported the back brace just enough, because we saw when we even left Iraq that, that's when Al-Qaeda came in. And all that stuff, the resources, the equipment that we had poured in, we had lost it, and it was a hard fight back. And then in Afghanistan, we didn't do the fight back, and the question on where Afghanistan goes is still be determined. But with that's what civil affairs does, and we can talk a little bit about it later. One of our missions is civil reconnaissance, right? So the ability to do. We say that the 3 shops, the operations shops in the world, or the 2 shops, the intelligence shops in the world. So the 3s do the blue force, the friendly forces, the 2s do the red forces, the enemy forces. Well, in many ways, civil affairs, often called the 9s, but not always, they do what we call either yellow or green, understanding the civil dimension or of the human. You saying a human domain is non-doctrinal, but I think everyone knows what I mean by that. And that's where we failed, right? We were there for 20 years, and I'm not sure who really understood. Sure, everybody read a book or something, or 5 books, but you didn't live it. You weren't out there every day. And, I don't know that I ever told Chris this, because he would have fired me on the spot. But in the beginning, when we were there, I used to go to the stinking Iraqi barber shop, man, before IEDs were prevalent. And they used to, I used to be kind of in and out, but I used to talk to about 10 Iraqis. And they used to tell me, hey, how come the garbage isn't picked up here? We haven't had water in a month. Well, what better place to do it? And, Chris used to help me host like town halls, and the Iraqi politicians were not used to that kind of feedback. And so, I think that's where we could have done a better job in Afghanistan. It was just, once the decision was made, that was just a hard mission to execute. And I think that's what most people's gripes are. I'm not invested as people are, because, the Army always wants one more unit, whatever that is, a company, a battalion, a brigade. They just want one more week. They just want $1 more million, and they'll do a better job for you. Yet until they get it, and they don't, because then they want another week, and then a week is a month, and a month is 6 months. And so wherever you are on the political spectrum, I wasn't in the Situation Room, but I think the president at the time just said, "Hey man, this is Trump. Like, you generals keep asking for 6 more months. Like, that's it. Somebody go sign a deal and get us out." And then President Biden's the guy that actually pulled the last of the troops out. So a lot of finger pointing to point around, but that's Iraq, Afghanistan, kind of all lumped in with some civil reconnaissance for civil affairs. And I'll just close with one of our other functions that we perform. It used to be called Civil Information Management, or CIM. It's now called Civil Knowledge Integration, CKI. And that just sounds like more integrated. So when I talked about the red, the blues, the greens, the yellow, who's creating that common operating picture, that COB for the commanders to allocate resources to achieve an effect, to do something, to make decisions, to move something on the battlefield. And then later on, I think we'll talk about competition, conflict, return to competition. So who's shaping all of that? In civil affairs and that human dimension of the land, sea, domain, because not so much cyber and space and air, who's doing that? And it should be civil affairs. It is often, but we're under-resourced. And because the Marine Corps got rid of their active duty civil affairs, the Navy a decade ago got rid of their Navy Reserve civil affairs, the Army had a battalion active duty, grew it to a brigade, grew another brigade, and now downsized that brigade to a battalion, and it's going away. So there's only one active duty brigade on active duty, and that's part of the Special Operations Command umbrella. And so the civil affairs, the 7 brigades that are in the reserves that work for U.S. Army Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command, Airborne, or KPOC, or USACAPOC, or short KPOC. And there's one in Hawaii that's indirect report. And so it's all in the reserves. So access to the reserves is difficult, it's costly, and it requires, if you want a sustained effect, a mobilization. And so I think one of the reasons for a failure in Afghanistan was lack of understanding for that human dimension, which required additional civil affairs resources delivering some of the stuff that Chris just talked about. And I'll sign off, mute here. And I think Hughes might have some stories about when he was at Third Army
Right.
Central, ARCENT. And so hold your follow-ups. We'll turn it over to Hughes, and then
General, you see me smiling and laughing a little bit. I love everything you said. I just wish you had a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more passion. That's all. That's it. That's all I request. Oh my gosh. It makes me feel so good that we have leaders in the military, had leaders in the military like you, who brought so much passion and so much knowledge to these problems. Let me ask Hughes, it's going to fall on you to address this question if you choose to. What do you say to somebody like, maybe I'm going to paraphrase Colonel Brad Washabaugh, Marine, here in the chat, who says, and he's not going to put it this way, but let's say, what do you say to somebody who says, you know what, nation building in Afghanistan is impossible. It's just too conflicted, too tribal. We're too ignorant of it. No civil affairs unit in the world would be able to bring what we would call anything close to a democracy to Afghanistan. So we shouldn't really even try. Hughes, what do you think about that argument?
Well, I guess that's one perspective. And the other perspective is what was put forth by both the Chris's. What I'd like to do, the whole Afghanistan thing was evolved. And if it's okay with you, what I like to do is take a biblical approach to this, because
Sure.
I was there in the very beginning. In 2001, I had just come out of brigade command, was assigned to Third Army as the senior Army Reserve advisor to Third Army, who was then commanded by PT Michaelshek, who had just taken command from Tommy Franks, who is then the CENTCOM commander. So I have no civil affairs background per se, but I had a pretty good feel for what was in the Army Reserve, and that was why I was selected for that position. In the summer of 2001, we were preparing for a major biannual exercise we do with the Egyptians called Bright Star. So we had just finished a whole series of command post exercises, and we're getting ready to deploy to Egypt for that major exercise that we have with the Egyptians. And what I recall was that we had probably once or twice a week a full staff update where all the members of the principals of the Third Army staff would present, hey, this is what's going on in my world, and this is how it relates to everything else. It was during the intel brief on the 9th of September that we got word that a guy by the name of Ahmad Massoud had been assassinated.
Mhm.
And he was the leader of the Northern Alliance, who was in opposition to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And he was a national hero. And I just remember hearing that and not paying much attention to that. And then fast forward 48 hours later, we get hit with the airplane, the airplane strikes in New York, at the Pentagon, and up in Pennsylvania. And then all of a sudden, the world changed for us. And what I remember on September 11th was probably within the first 3 hours, we were on the phone between our staff. That's the younger Massoud. That's Massoud.
That's his
Yeah.
son. Okay.
No, that's his son.
Okay.
So we were engaged in furious conversations with CENTCOM. And I remember in our conversations and discussions between the staff, Tommy Franks asked Michael Shek what he thought we should do. And the first words out of Michael Shek's mouth was, we need to activate the CFLC, Coalition Forces Land Component Command, which would then bring together our allies and ourselves as we get ready to deploy. So we knew something was going to happen. We probably in the back of our minds know that Bright Star was not going to happen. And oh, by the way, we're going to start deployments. And exactly that's what happened. Within the first couple of weeks, our special ops guys were linking up with the special activities division guys from CIA downrange. And we had already begun negotiations with other countries in the region, primarily Uzbekistan, to take over Karshi-Khanabad, or otherwise known as K2. And Karshi-Khanabad became our major staging base in the very beginning of the Operation Enduring Freedom. And so, we had an element, the headquarters element, 10th Mountain Division, headed up by Buster Hagenbach, and then elements of the special ops who were kind of on the other side of the field. And, just planning for how we were going to get into to Afghanistan. And I'll put it this way, within 60 days, we wind up pushing toward Kabul, through Bagram, seizing Kandahar as our major operating bases to take the fight to the enemy. And I think at that point in time, civil affairs was an afterthought. I mean, the whole thing for us at that time was to find the bad guys and kill them.
Right.
Everybody want bin Laden. That was our primary focus. And so we did that with a very small force too. And, which is a different story. But at that moment in time, we were capped at 8,000 troops on the ground in Afghanistan. That includes the pointed end of the spear and all the logistical support. And we kept scratching our head. I mean, who is putting this camp on a failed nation state and the number of people we have there? Well, it turned out to be later, and I think we had that discussion when we talked about Iraq several months ago with you guys, that planning had already begun for what would later become Iraqi freedom. And that impacted the size of the force and what we could have on the ground in Afghanistan. I would tell you, my recollection, in the very beginning of Operation Enduring Freedom, we had elements, lift capabilities from the 101st. We had one brigade combat team from the 82nd, and we had elements of the 10th Mountain Division. That was about the size of it. So you weren't talking a whole lot. And civil affairs, we had some elements there. But there wasn't much attention paid to that. I think, we understood, that goodwill was important to us. And my recollection is that we had some civil affairs elements that came forward, and they would do things like go to the villages, help build wells with the engineers, to get water pumping. And then some of the other things that certainly well-intentioned, but didn't make much sense upon reflection, is getting stuff from the United States, things like books for kids and things of that sort, to pass out to the local population, which wasn't very useful because all the books were in English and they don't read English. And those type of things that we don't think about, although the intentions were good. So yeah, that was a growing process for us. And probably a year later for me, I wind up moving from Afghanistan to Kuwait to begin planning operations for Iraqi freedom. And that's where our attention was focused on. And very little attention was paid to Afghanistan, quite candidly.
Hughes, would you say that if we had put more emphasis on civil affairs from the beginning in Afghanistan, the Taliban might not be in power today?
I don't know. I would like to think so, but I'm not sure if the outcome would have been
be
any different. I just don't know. And again, that's because our focus changed from Afghanistan to Iraq.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I mean, in the 2004 election, I think the phrase was we took our eye off the ball. We took our eye off the ball, which was Afghanistan, and started focusing on Iraq, and that was detrimental to the war in Afghanistan. General Stokel, you were going to say something?
Yeah, no, I think, Todd, that's a great question, right? And so, I'm definitely in the Hughes's corner. Like, I would hope so. I would think so, but I can't guarantee it. And I spent a lot of time in Korea, and I just recently took a contracting there to support the Korean Battle Simulation Center for civil affairs activity or civil military operations. They like to use the term CMO. But the way our rotations work, it's tough, right? And so, I'm a German speaker, Arabic speaker, a little bit of English. And so I think we just do our language programs and, watching SF guys that are Arabic speakers, be a commander in 7th Special Forces Group, which is Southern Command, Southcom. It just doesn't make any sense. And so you become like a Lebanon expert. And so where do they send you? Afghanistan. Like it just doesn't make any sense. But the only way to get the next step towards battalion or group command is you got to go take whatever they're going to give you and thrive at it, even though you're not that cultural expert. And by no means is the training or the funding at the level it should be for our forces that are going to be doing the reconnaissance, the relationships, the rehearsals, the 3 Rs. You now have security force assistants, brigades, out there. They have a 2-star command now. So there's a lot of people in a lot of different pools that they got their toes dipped into. But again, it's that rotation plan, 6, 9, 12 months on the ground, man, you're just getting started. And it's just like command tenures of 2 years. Like, and the reserves used to be 3, and the current chief of the Army Reserve has curtailed those to 2. That's 24 weekends over a 2-year period. You're barely getting to know what's going on. So I think it's a whole of government. It's a whole of Department of Defense, how we look at it. And I'll just close this segment with, I was at a Council on Foreign Relations meeting talking to the Commandant of the Marine Corps just as he got rid of his active duty civil affairs. And I had my little name tag on. He didn't know who I was, but he's poking me. Oh, Chris, you're going to take care of that in the Indo-Pacific for me. And I'm sure I'm going to do the best I can, but I already have, this many this many missions and this many resources. So how is adding to my plate going to be helpful? Well, you're going to have to make the hard choices. No, I wanted to say, no, sir, you're going to need an inter-service memorandum of agreement to say what Army missions, what Marine Corps missions the Army are going to pick up and which ones are going to fall through the crack. And then somebody needs to decide that's acceptable risk or no, that's not acceptable. But that was, at least 1 or 2 commandants ago. So big decisions are made, and you'd like to think that they think about most of the second and third order effects, but as Chris knows and Hughes knows from being at these 2 and 3 and 4-star headquarters, man, sometimes you just wonder, like, who is the last person to get to that senior leader? Because that's not what we talked about last night till 23:30. How did the daily operations order or daily fragmentary order, the daily frago, not include what we just agreed upon at 23:29 as we all walked out the door? Who got to the boss on the PT run the next day or something? So back over to you. Thanks.
And I do want to ask you what you think the role of civil affairs is for our near future in the context of the great power global competition. But Brad Washabaugh, could you please ask the question that you put in the chat and see what kind of answers we could get from Chris, and Hughes?
It's a simple question, probably not in depth enough, but it just seemed like mission creep came in. Our goal was to kill terrorists, to keep rid them of the sanctuary, and we came up a lot of good ideas, and they seem to get out of control with nation building. I just don't think the history, the culture, the geography, I think that was a big task that was going to commit U.S. forces for the long haul, 20 years plus, as it were, and probably more, that we needed for that mission to succeed. We needed to leave a standing force in Afghanistan, which by policy we chose not to. So I think the tough questions need to be asked up front. If we're going to do nation building, we have to commit to a long war, a lot of resources, and we go into these things kind of blind sometimes, and they evolve. And we're all our smart people in the State Department and advising our leaders about, the military is great on execution, but there's often a deaf ear of advice going to our policymakers because they don't have that ability to listen. It still remains a divide between the civilian military leadership, which there should be, but there isn't that healthy respect of advice up front, and changes of government administration, they lead to these awful messes that we get ourselves into. You got to understand the cultural aspects, you got to understand the history, and you got to match it to the mission. That's just my simple Marine Corps infantry view of things. And I have a great respect. I'm a special operations alumni. I have a great respect for civil affairs and PSYOPs. They're a crucial component. They've been underfunded, undervalued, and misunderstood for a long time. They probably still are. So I think discussions like this are very important. And I'm so glad we have the guests on tonight to talk about it. Thanks.
No, Brad, thanks. And then Chris, I'll turn it over to you. I see you raise your hand there. I think you're spot on, right? And so that, I firmly believe this, and I don't know, I haven't gotten senior leaders that they kind of just nod and wink or whatever, but look, there's nothing that the industrial military complex, and I know that's kind of a loaded term, it has an interest in civil affairs. So there's some great software out there that helps do link analysis and can reports are dumped into some in a database, and that civil knowledge integration. There's searches that are out there, and you can put together some powerful common operating pictures for commanders. But like, okay, but you guys don't do anything, and there's no money in it for these defense contractors, and it's this vicious cycle. And I just don't think we've had leaders that are willing to make those hard decisions at the Department of Army level or the Departments of Defense. Now, having said that, Secretary Gates many years ago said, and General Mattis has said, for if I'm firing on people, we kind of failed. And Gates has said, look, Treasury, State Department, these people are often just one deep, these departments. Meanwhile, Army Central alone has like 10 foreign affairs officers. And the State Department has like one person on the Iraq desk. So when that person needs to go to training or needs a vacation or leave, like there's nobody covering down, or somebody's covering down on Lebanon or Iran and Iraq. But the military is just huge. You know, if you're not getting what you want from the Army service component, you know, you can go right to the next headquarters, Central Command, and it's just layers upon layers of people that are willing to do work. So I think I am a big believer in the interagency and that they try hard. They are not as deployable. They are not as expeditionary. And there's some elements within the State Department. Obviously, you know, USAID has the ability. There's some disaster response folks that are more agile, but you know, they say state, aid, and defense. You know, aid, they do a lot of their work through contractors in the country, right? It's not like you have their officers doing it. And so I think we do have the ear, but at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, I know I'm going to need you. And they go back to what Chris Holshek talked about, governance. Yeah, but you're what they call that phase 4, the stability ops. No, man, I'm the phase 0, the shaping operations. So you don't have to go to phase 3, you know, the combat. And it just gets lost, and it's hard. I mean, for those that were in Afghanistan, I wasn't, but I was supporting through other ways. You know, you have requests for like tanks. Like, so actually I was at Special Operations Command Europe, you know, SOC-EUR, and I understood why the SF guys wanted, you know, chewing tobacco, right? You know, that was their connection to home. But meanwhile, once Big Army went in, now you need cement, you need rocks. I mean, there was even a Special Forces 06 at like, well, should I come over there? Like, do we have a hard top? And, you know, I wanted to say, sir, you have a poncho liner and a red light flashlight. What more do you need? Like, there's a, you know, general purpose small tent. Like, what do you need this massive bureaucracy for? Because that person was a great garrison commander, loved, invested in training. But when it came time to execute, it was a little bit on the tough side. So I thought, Brad, you made some great points there. I would make a plug for the whole of government and defer to my brothers and sisters in the interagency. You know, that's not their mandate. Their mission statement is not to be expeditionary. I mean, there's a reason that, you know, all the C-17s and C-5s are in the Air Force, right? And because although the State Department does contract their own Air Force in Afghanistan, in Iraq, because they realize they have to move people around too. So I thought that was a great question. And then Todd, you know, if we do get to his SOCOM question, I'd love a crack at that. But over to Chris or you or whoever.
Let's go to SOCOM question after a station break. It's getting to the top of the hour. I just want to remind people I'm Todd DiPastino. This is the VBC Happy Hour. I'm looking through the Zoom room. I see some people I haven't seen in a while. Bob Iyer from the Johnstown area. Good to see you. Jack Bokey, Holocaust survivor and OSS agent, and Richie Boy from World War II joining us from Canada. He's going to be our special guest on October 25th. On our Greatest Generation Live. Jack, it's just always a privilege to be in the same Zoom room as you, as a hero like you. Tyler Britton, oh my gosh, Tyler, I think I met you years ago at the 911th Airlift Wing when we had a breakfast. You're from Ohio, I know Air Force. You're involved with doing the same kind of programs of getting veterans to share their stories. Thank you for joining us. Andy Rico, I usually don't join us online. I want to say hello. Deb Bussinger, if you want to unmute and say hello, please do feel free to do so. Would love to pitch the map, but I want to invite Deb Bussinger, if she wants to say hello. Cliff Pfeiffer, you brought up something. If you want to unmute yourself and remark on the comment that you made to me in an email today about our VBC bulletin that went out today. I think that was a very smart, perceptive comment. If you want to make it, please do feel free to do so. I didn't. Hey, Cliff, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. I didn't want to be a big critic of your magazine because I love it to death. But when I saw that mention, there it is right there, how baseball saved my life. And down at the very bottom, it says Medal of Honor winners. And that always strikes a nerve with me. And just like I sent you the email, you know, these heroes, their names were never put in a hat and their names were drawn out. They earned it. So that's
Cliff,
why they're called recipients.
the second I started reading your email, I went, oh my gosh, because I realized I've learned years ago that you don't call a Medal of Honor recipient a Medal of Honor winner. And I thought it was ironic that here we did, and I'm the one who laid this out. Here we did is we put this wonderful story about this Korean War veteran and his baseball career right next to this other wonderful article about Jack Eckenrode, who's one of our veterans, a 95-year-old Air Force pilot who just won 5 gold medals from the Senior Olympics. Now he's a medal winner. Jack is. Medal of Honor recipients, as one Silver Star recipient told me, like, this is not a medal you win. It's not something that you want to receive. You're better off if you don't get this thing. If you get one of these things, it's because you've been through something really awful that nobody should have to go through. So thank you for your close reading of that. My apologies for including the term winners there, but I agree with you, Cliff. That was that escaped my
Don't feel
notice.
bad. Yeah, don't feel bad. I see it all the time. You know, when we go to speak to the high school students every year, that's the first thing I want to bring up because they always talk about Medal of Honor.
Yeah,
So
rookie mistake. Hey, Pat Hughes, you have your hand up, I think, or are you clapping? Oh, did Pat leave? Oh, Pat. Hey, I see Dick Westerhoff. Hi, Dick. I hope you're coming to the breakfast tomorrow because we're going to be talking about, in part, the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I know that you were in the Air Force for that. And Pat Hughes, were you going to say something or just have your thumbs up? Okay, very good. Very good. Then before we move on and continue our conversation, let's see here. I want to let everybody know we have the Vitatalent blood drive still going, and through the end of November, that is for every blood donation you make in the name of the Veterans Breakfast Club, the VBC gets $15. Not a bad deal. The code is D062, and I know Jim Jameson has been giving that code and giving blood monthly for, I think, years now. So thank you, Jim Jameson, and anybody else who does so. If you do give blood, and we do urge you to give blood, please do so for the Veterans Breakfast Club. We have coffee that we could ship out to people. You could go to our website and order bags of coffee. We get $2.89 for every pound of coffee. This is coffee grown by 12 farmers in Vietnam. And Bamboo Bob Coffee is the one who does the direct trade relationship with the farmers so that the profits do go to the farmers in Vietnam. And then finally, of course, or not finally, but of course, once again, if we don't have your address, please do let us know. You can email me at todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. That's Todd, TODD, @veteransbreakfastclub.org, and we will send you the magazine. And then we have a survey. We do a feedback survey. It's a simple 3 questions. Sean will share it in the Zoom chat and also on the Facebook side. 3 simple questions. What do you think about this program? What did you like or not like about it, and how can we improve? That's what we have. So please do fill out the survey if you can. We'd love you to do it. All right, let's get back to the conversation we have here. What would you guys say is the role of civil affairs in this new world that we're looking at now? A world where there's this great power competition. I don't know if you adhere to that concept or not. You mentioned the Indo-Pacific, Chris Stokel. Is civil affairs going to be playing a role in this kind of new strategic approach that our country seems to be taking?
So I'll just jump in real quick. So I think we absolutely, but they're not going to be playing as big a role as they should be. And that goes back to some of the funding, the access. It's in the reserves. That means it's much more of a challenge to reach into. You see stuff like the National Guard State Partnership Program that has an enduring presence in the same country. Civil affairs, we try to break up the world using the 4 Civil Affairs Command to cover down on different areas of the world. I think we're partially successful at it. It depends on the personality, the energy level, the civilian job responsibilities of that 1-star general. And then, of course, the staff and the subordinate brigade commanders, battalion commanders, company commanders, and of course, their first sergeants or command sergeants major. It's got to be a whole team approach. And then are they able to integrate with the other instruments of national power and the interagency? And that's where that civil knowledge integration comes in. We should be mapping the network, and then we need to be making that information available to the entire government, because we may stumble upon Chinese real estate in Palau. So who knows about that? Or during a Cobra Gold, I'm talking to Thailand educators, and they tell me they really want to teach English, but the Chinese provide free textbooks and instructors that come to their school, and they gear it towards tourism and hotel kind of management. And so if you score high enough on a Chinese exam, they will send you to either the equivalent of an associate or a bachelor's degree in China. And then they're going to give you a job when you graduate. Like, what's the U.S. government doing? And we have some scholarships that are out there, but they're small in numbers. And so it's hard to compete against that kind of money. And one belt, one road. I like to call it one belt, one road. It's 4 characters in Chinese. And but the Chinese had a branding issue. So Belt and Road Initiative sounds much better than, the overtones of one belt, one road type stuff. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues and see what they say. And I can jump in with specific examples of how we're doing the reconnaissance, the relationships, the rehearsals during the Department of Defense exercise program, which sometimes include the interagency and often involve our partners and allies, which will be critical as we continue to monitor the conflict continuum now and hopefully prevent conflict. So thanks.
Chris or Hughes, did you want to jump in? Yes, Chris.
Yeah, I thought maybe I'd just kind of pick up where I left off minutes ago when I was talking about the sort of post-conflict role of civil affairs. Because just going back to answering the question about Afghanistan, and I made mention that, nation building works if it's focused and if its goals are achievable. If they're not, then I don't care how well you do. So that, in short, is the answer to the Afghanistan issue.
Okay.
I'd like to kind of jump forward because the thing that and I like to look at this in a broader context. The wars that we have been fighting since actually the 1990s, the engagements that we've been in since the 1990s, since the end of the Cold War, have been these non-wars, in between wars within countries more than between countries, or as much as between countries in Africa, and people-centric, especially since 9/11. They've been people-centric. They've been fundamentally highly contextualized politically, culturally, information-wise. The rapidity of the distribution of information, the idea that within a matter of a couple of hours, you could have videos being posted of a Marine peeing on a corpse,
Mhm.
or the guys at Abu Ghraib. So your margin of error in sort of the moral spaces of war, we've kind of forgotten that. The civil affairs problem in many ways is emblematic of the larger problem of the Army and of the United States. And this is this overwhelming focus on overwhelming force, firepower, and technology to win wars. And this stems all the way back to 1865, when the industrial North won over the agricultural South. And it's been reinforced ever since. This sort of physical, this very narrow interpretation of Clausewitz, to being the war being fundamentally physical. War is not fundamentally physical. War is fundamentally psychological. If anybody wants to go to school on this, don't think about the Ukraine war, about why so much the Ukrainians are winning it, but why the Russians are losing it. Because the Russians, I mean, when I got involved in the wars of post 9/11, the one looming question in Clausewitz that kept coming at my brain was this idea of the supreme requirement of both statesmen and commanders in war is to understand the war that you're in. We didn't do this in Vietnam either. And so, I'll tell you what told me very pointedly, and Chris Stockel knows this, he was there. And I'm not going to name the name, because he was really just a messenger. But it was a former USAC U.S. Army Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Commander. Great guy. But he came back from some sessions in the Army. This is about 3 or 4 years ago. And he was basically saying that, and this is still true to a large extent, that unless you can talk about lethality, the big buzzword in the Army is lethality. Unless you can show how you are, and I'm going to say what you said earlier, unless you can show how what you do contributes to the Army's ability to kill people and break things faster and better than you did before, they were not interested. And that told me in that very moment that this is what the Army is interested in. That told me in a moment that in the last 20 years of fighting in Afghanistan and fighting in Iraq and going back to Vietnam even, we've learned absolutely nothing. Nothing from these wars. We keep reinforcing the same problem. That is why civil affairs is not very well understood. I mean, operationally and tactically, we point out that the role of civil affairs in sort of the phase 3, sort of the combat part phase, is, and leading up to it, is that we are there to help both commanders and statesmen, but obviously commanders first, see, understand, and influence the civilian part of the battle space, psychological aspects of war that connect the dots between policy and between firefights going on the ground. We are there to do that, but we're not just there as some sort of post-conflict ability. We're there across what they call the competition continuum. We are even more important to global global competition. We are more important to warfare now than we ever were, because of the obvious importance of having what they call positional advantage. That is strategic and operational capital that you have to amass. You know, Rumsfeld once talked about, you go to war with what you've got. Well, this is very true. The steady state is where you collect the positional advantage. Civil affairs right now is not very heavily deployed, especially the reserve part. And I failed to mention that 95% of civil affairs is in fact from the reserve. And why is that? Well, it's the old saying, how do you catch a crook? How do you get a soldier to talk to a civilian? You get a soldier who 28 days of the month is a civilian. and works in the civilian capacities and understands the civilian mindset. It's not just about civil affairs, it's not just about skill sets, it's about mindsets. That's why the overwhelming number of these guys are in the reserves, because they bring their civilian acquired skills, but they also bring their civilian acquired mindsets. And they can, there's this important principle in special operations called empathy. Not to be confused with sympathy, by the way, kind of Stockholm syndrome. That's what we call going native. But it's understanding, it's not just understanding the battle space, it's not just understanding the operational and strategic context of what you're involved in, but it's understanding your enemy from the perspective of how they see it. Not because you want to sympathize with your enemy, but you want to defeat them. So again, if you really want to go to school on an army that has totally failed to understand the type of war that they're in, look at the Russians. They think this is largely kinetic, and they're apt, and the Ukrainians are kicking their ass. Yes, because yes, they're getting some they're getting some good hardware from the Americans and others. But what they have in place is a better network. They have a better civil network on the ground behind the enemy lines. They have a better civil network in Ukraine. They have a better network of reliances and relationships. I mean, Russia is practically isolated now. And the Ukrainians have been working on this for some time. And we've been working on it with them for some time. So we're winning this war by proxy. I wish we could take a look at these lessons right now and understand that one of the things that we've been pitching in the Civil Affairs Association, and I would invite anybody to go to the Civil Affairs Association website and peruse there. We have a symposium that you're more than welcome to join where we talk about civil affairs. On the 14th and 15th of November, we'll be announcing that very soon. It's a Zoom meeting. You can join it. Anybody can join it. It's totally free. And we get into these conversations. One of the things we're trying to help the Army understand is not only what competition is. We were challenged by a previous deputy commander of the Army Futures Command that said, hey, you guys more than anyone else can help the Army understand what competition truly is, because you work in those spaces all the time. You are a force. We are the premier force that wins without fighting. Secure the victory is our motto. Secure the victory doesn't just mean at the end of the war. Secure the victory means before the war. It's winning without fighting is the acting of skill, says Sun Tzu. Well, that's more applicable now than it's ever been. The reason we need to be engaged in the field right now and not just there, when break glass only in case of emergency, like you most reservists, is we need to be building those networks, need to be building that situational understanding and awareness that our politicians and our commanders need, okay? And we need to build those relationships that we can leverage so when the fertilizer does hit the ventilator, okay, we can quickly assume moral ascendancy and political ascendancy and information dominance, if you will, over our enemies and our adversaries, and leverage our allies much better than we have in the past. So we can bring to bear not just our physical capabilities, but it's our physical capabilities in combination with our psychological capabilities. There is nothing more powerful than a force that is seen as highly effective, both in terms of soft and hard power. I've seen this work. One of the reasons that the US military, and I say this to my veteran colleagues all the time when we go out and do our motorcycle rides, and why the veterans to me are very important to what's going on in this country, is that we are the single largest, most successful multicultural institution in the history of the world. And that's very, very powerful, because it's just who we are is what makes us so powerful. It's not our boys, noise, and toys that we bring. It's the fact that we represent something that is totally inimical to the narrative that we heard as far back as the Balkans. Only multiculturalism doesn't work. You want to bet? Try to go toe in toe with the US military. That's one of the reasons we've had the kind of wars we've had, because no one wants to go toe to toe with us. So they use these asymmetric type wars. And they do it for a couple of reasons, because they know that this is a vulnerability. We have yet to really understand this broader sense of warfare that we are now in, because we've been so focused since 1945 on winning wars through material and technological superiority. And we need to step out of that model, because we're not only not going to be successful, but we're going to waste a lot of people.
What an eloquent spokesperson, excuse me, you are for civil affairs and for part of the broader vision. I want to go to Greg Yost next. I know he has a question for you, but before I do, and Greg, you please do prepare to ask your question. Everything that you're saying reminds me very much, in the 75th anniversary year of the beginning of the Cold War, of George Kennan's long telegram, which was sent back in 1946, in which he, number one, described the war we're in. This is the Cold War. This is the war we're fighting. You must understand. He gave the broader vision of what the war was. Number two, he said it's a war of people. It's a people war, a people conflict. It is, and we forget. We think of aggressive Soviet moves to take over territory. That happened, but what also happened was, in a devastated Europe, people in France and Germany and Belgium, they were lured to the promise of communism, to trade, freedom for security, to get the housing, the food they needed, the clothing they needed. And what Kennan said is, if we don't provide that, if the Western world does not meet the basic needs of 2,000 calories a day of the population of Western Europe, we will lose this war. We will lose this war. That, we have to start thinking of it. I think he didn't use the term civil affairs, but I think he would absolutely be nodding in agreement to so much of what you're saying, Chris. And it did work. The Marshall Plan and all that was really an effort.
And one of the things we've been trying to get across to the Army recently, and the Civil Affairs Association, and through the Civil Affairs Association, but the civil affairs community, is, look, you have to consider civil affairs a maneuver force amongst the population, as a moral maneuver force. Okay, once you understand that, once you understand the moral component of war, the moral domain, if you will, of war, and the human domain, and we maneuver in those spaces. If you understand maneuver, that the civil affairs, psychological operations, information operations, all these winning without fighting capabilities. What we propose to the Army is, the Army needs to take all these capabilities, put them under one very large command, call it the engagement command or whatever. But basically, you need to take these capabilities and to train, organize, equip, and manage and resource them with the same seriousness as you do the infantry. Now, it's not saying that we have to have as many civil affairs guys as infantry. Not at all. We have plenty of them now. We have over 10,000 of them. It's not that we don't have enough. It's that these guys are not well organized, well trained, well equipped, well resourced. If you manage, no one in their right mind, no senior leader in the Army in their right mind would manage capabilities like civil affairs, would manage capabilities like infantry and armor and other quote unquote physical maneuver forces the way that civil affairs is managed, where you have the training and doctrine over in special operations, but you have the force management, force development, force generation over in the big army. I mean, it's insane. It's schizophrenic the way we manage civil affairs. It's a wonder we're as successful as we are.
Greg Yost, why don't you ask your question?
Wow. Okay. I don't know if I have a question anymore. I maybe so much of what I had sort of hoped to cover had been covered there. Now, Chris Stocko, I saw you just talking a few seconds ago without your mic on. If you want to chime in, please do, because your expertise vastly exceeds mine. So, Chris, you were going to say something, I think.
No, I was just Googling a couple of things and putting some links to some other videos out there that could expand the knowledge, expand the base of the pyramid about some of the civil affairs that we've been talking about. because again, Chris Holchek has just been doing a phenomenal job with the Civil Affairs Association. We line up some great keynote speakers. A lot of that's available on YouTube. We've interviewed General Brooks. He got it. One time in Korea, he's like, okay, but where are my civil affairs folks? And they're buried in the 3 shop, in the 35 shop, which is futures, and then under them. And there's only 2 active duty folks that support the entire C9, the Civil Affairs Directorate in Korea. And the Anomi Journal that's up on the site now. I mean, there's just so much information on that website for those. You see the noon report, the roundtable reports. The editorial board has some stuff about mega cities, even though Kyiv's not a mega city, but you think about cities, Chinatown, Germantown, Koreatown, all within New York City. Imagine all of that transported underground in the metro network being used as bomb shelters, and life is happening underground. So what does that city within a city under the city subterranean look like? And there's just so much, that's what we try to do at the association, and then spread out with forums like this. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to get some links out there, but for civil affairs specifically, there's some joint doctrine. Some of the older reports that we did included the Marine Corps and the Navy. But right now it's an Army-centric fight, and the conventional force, meaning the not special operations force, is USA KPOC, right? Or KPOC, that's Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command, which also has the only Army Reserve Theater Information Operations Group. We used to have 2. Army Reserve decided they should get rid of 1. Of course, the National Guard maintained all of their what's called TIOGs, and that's the information related capabilities. You'll hear the acronym IRC. And so it's happening out there. But one of the questions was, it is kind of an afterthought. There are a few leaders that get it, but at the end of the day, they can pound their head as much as they want with the Department of the Army, and they're going to resist. And, what I really appreciated about General Brooks when I supported him in Korea, along with the Indo-PACOM civil affairs portfolio I had, he did not want to be the phase 4, that stability phase, without a plan. And he tasked the Army Reserve 1-star headquarters to do it. And I'm like, hey, sir, I got to worry about all of the Pacific, not just you. But that was then, my button's bigger than your button. I mean, my father survived Korea with the 25th Infantry Division. I was, 25-50% chance I was going to die there. But luckily it didn't happen, and hopefully we can hold the alliance together. So thanks for the shout out and the pass off. And I turn it back over to you, Todd. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris Stockel. And I think that answered Bob Mizwa's question here in the chat. Bob, thank you for putting it there. Before we leave tonight, I do want to introduce Deb Bussinger once again. Deb is an Air Force veteran. She sent me an email late last week, saying that she does this wonderful work at the MAPS Museum, which is let me get this right, Deb, it's the Military Aviation Preservation Society Museum in North Canton, Ohio.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
I was so excited when I got your email, because the Veterans Breakfast Club has done 2 trips to the MAPS Museum, but it was many years ago. And I hear that it's more impressive now. Can you tell a little bit about what the museum is and what you're seeking, what your role is in the museum preservation?
Well, we're just over 30 years old. It started with just a group of pilots who worked out of the aircraft hangar, our restoration hangar right now. We took over the National Guard hangar. I don't remember exactly how long ago we took that over, but we have our gallery heroes downstairs. We took in the Ohio Military Museum, which was located in Massillon, Ohio. We took them in a few years ago because their volunteers were passing away and no one was there to manage it. We're almost all volunteer also. During COVID, we took advantage of the shutdown, and our average age is 73 5. I'm one of the young ones there. So we had 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds putting up drywall, tiling, trying to get another gallery space upstairs ready. And being an Air Force veteran, I was an avionics technician. I worked on A7s and A10s, and there are not a lot of, I don't see myself very many places. I don't see myself at the museum. So that was troubling for me. And we're putting a new gallery upstairs with multiple different eras and conflicts. And I had come across the donut dollies and flight attendants about 6 or 8 months ago, and then happened upon this show, which was fantastic. And I've had, since you have forwarded on my email, I have had 4 emails today from donut dollies that we're going to connect up, and we want to put them in the displays upstairs, put their stuff out there, because we want people to walk through our area and go, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Deb, do you know the other group you need to interview are the Pan Am stewardesses or the other commercial? I mean, absolutely. It's amazing their service has gone unrecognized.
Well, that's what I looked for initially and found you.
And that's right. Yeah, you got them. That's right.
I think I have been in contact with her, but the flight attendants are a little bit harder because they're usually based out of places where there are international flights and stuff like that. So, which is still fine. I'm fine with that. I do oral history interviews, so I'll go out to nursing homes, but I still work full time. So I'm sticking this in between my days off, But I want the stories heard. I want firsthand. Right now we have 2 interns who are working with us on this project, and they're so excited about it. They're going to do a donut dolly presentation at the end of the semester for their women's history class. 2 gentlemen who are volunteering with us or interning with us.
So this is I encourage people to go to the website mapsairmuseum.org. That's mapsairmuseum.org. They're in North Canton, Ohio, which is not too far from Pittsburgh. We've done 2 day trips there in the past. Deb, you remind me that we should do a Veterans Breakfast Club day trip there next year. We really should. We could go tour the museum, which is, I think, a lot bigger now, as you said, than it was when we were last there. Have lunch, come back home. It's a wonderful experience. It's a wonderful museum. And I thank you for the work that you do with the veterans and preserving that history there. And I encourage you, let me know when you have events going on at or if there are events going on at the museum, we could help publicize them, whatever you wish.
Okay.
And of course, we want you to come on. We want to have you share your story too.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you and Sean. Though the 2 of you are the ones that I initially saw, and you just do a fantastic job. I'm very impressed, and I want to learn some skills from you guys. So,
well, do you know what one skill you could do? You could do the interviews over Zoom and record them.
I have done that for long distance people. So I have done that. Yeah.
Sometimes
I actually do have some of the snippets of the interviews on our website because I volunteer in the library there. And I have 250 audio recordings from Kent State High School and Perry High School from like 1980, 1970, something like that I'm recording right now. We're putting up online. I have another intern who's working on that. And one woman, it was a home front project, and she talked about, the interview was, oh, well, when did where were you when the war? And usually it's Pearl Harbor, and they, say when it was. And she said, was that 1918, 1919? And I thought she was confused. No, she was talking about World War I.
Cool.
Her grandfather was in the Civil War, and they let one of the James boys stay in their house. So that interview is up. That audio recording is up on linked on our website.
One of the James boys, as in like Jesse James?
Yeah.
Wow, is that cool? Oh man, Larry Googans remembers Jesse James. I think he served with him. Just kidding. Hey, Chris Holshek, Chris Stockel, Hughes Turner, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we covered a lot of ground and learned a lot. Thank you so much. And thank you all for hanging with us. If you're living in the Pittsburgh area, would love to see you at our breakfast tomorrow. If not, maybe we'll see you on Thursday night when we do Pan Am in World War II. Thank you all. Jack Boki, thank you again for joining us tonight. Good night, everybody. Take care. Thank you, Sean.